I'm going to talk about entropy and growth, the new global model. I've been doing a lot of thought about this. I remember it was maybe 3 months ago, and I was having a discussion with a friend of mine in the United States. And do you hear me, by the way, in the back of the room? Is the microphone's good? And she was talking about how there seemed to be no energy anywhere. Wherever she goes, whatever, stores or post office or government office, she said there's just no vitality. And I said, yeah, it's entropy. And if you go to the dictionary, this is what it says about entropy. I know, Gerhard. Yes, good. Now, Gerhard and I had a series of email exchanges about entropy because the physicists have a very specific meaning when they talk about entropy. I'm using it in a metaphorical sense, but first let's look at what the definition says. The degradation of the matter and energy in the universe to an ultimate state of inert uniformity, or a process of degradation or running down, or a trend to disorder. All spontaneous processes are irreversible. Actually, not all spontaneous processes are irreversible, and the example given often is, ice can melt down to water, but water can then be frozen into ice again. But be that as it may, processes are irreversible. It has been said that the entropy of the universe is increasing. That is, more and more energy becomes unavailable for conversion into work. Because of this, the universe is said to be running down. Well, I'm using it as a metaphor, and as we will see as this talk progresses, it's yes and no. That's why the presentation is entitled Entropy and Growth, because it's not all of a piece. But are we running down? Are we headed for the next Great Depression? Some researchers at MIT predict a global economic collapse by 2030. And in fact, the data or the results they came up with after analyzing the data are not unlike the results that came up in a famous report on the limits of growth done by the Club of Rome in 1972. And I know very few of you in this room are old enough to even remember that. But I was like you guys in the back at that point in time, and it was big news because the Earth is running down, we're going to run out of resources, we're not going to be able to run our machinery and cars and so on and so forth. And 1972, that was a clarion call. Some of you may remember 1973 was the first of the oil shocks, and so on and so forth. But the question, since we'll look at some of the things going on around the world, is indeed energy running down? And if so, what might be responsible for it, and what might we do about it? So, let's look at the evidence before we jump to hasty conclusions. Now, in the U.S., let's look at the U.S. first, because that obviously is the pig in the python, the elephant in the room. Choose whatever simile you want. It's a big country and a big market. And, how's it doing? Well, your guess is almost as good as mine, but the unemployment is still very high in the U.S., although it is selective, as it is here, by the way. I just had a discussion with one of you that there are jobs in Japan going begging. There may be jobs going begging in the USA, too. And I do know my daughter lives in the oil patch, and in the oil patch, people are doing just fine, thank you. But not in many of the major centers. And it is true that many of those who are out of work may have already left the workforce, especially, let's say, they're 60 or 55, and they just have given up. They're not looking anymore. And of course, with all the talk that's been done about alternative sources of energy, we're still very much dependent on the internal combustion engine, which still, by and large, depends on petroleum byproducts. So as that price goes up, people are, in fact, people are constrained to the point where they're very careful about, sorry about that, I'm just learning here. I'm from the electromechanical age. People will plan their trips. Many people in the United States do not live in a place where there's a convenient public transportation system. So they always depend on their cars, and now they're being very careful to only use their car once a week, to do a sort of serial